Last week, when that footage dropped of Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark dabbing it up on the sideline, I knew exactly what we were looking at. A total PR stunt. And I'm not the only one who saw through it, because everybody in the basketball world has been questioning this relationship since day one. But here's where it gets interesting. Just days after that buddy-buddy moment, Stephanie White went on a podcast and told the world that her and Caitlin are absolutely aligned, completely on the same page, besties to the core. She said it with confidence, with conviction. Then the footage dropped. And what we're about to break down isn't just a coaching moment caught on camera. It's undisputed proof that everything you've been hearing about the Indiana Fever locker room is real, it's raw, and it's way uglier than anyone anticipated. The truth is about to come out. Let me take you back about a week. The Indiana Fever had just released some footage of Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark on the sideline together, and they're laughing, they're dabbing it up, everything looks perfect. The optics were flawless. It's the kind of content that gets shared across social media to convince fans that everything is fine, that the narrative about tension in that locker room is just conspiracy theory nonsense. But I called it immediately. I told everyone watching Street Hoops that moment was a total setup, a calculated PR move designed to get ahead of something much bigger brewing behind closed doors. Why would I say that? Because for weeks, months even, analysts and insiders have been quietly whispering about the Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark dynamic. Nobody wants to say it out loud on ESPN or during those sanitized post-game shows, but the basketball community knows. There's friction. There's tension. And it's not surface-level stuff. This is the kind of locker room energy that affects on-court performance, that impacts how a franchise functions from the inside out. Then, just days after that perfectly choreographed sideline moment, Stephanie White shows up on the Query and Company radio show. And she goes all in. Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement. She's talking about how much she respects Caitlin, how they're identical in their competitive fire, their perfectionism, how she loves going to work with her every single day, and how she loves that Caitlin loves being coached and challenged and pushed. She's painting this picture of a harmonious coach-player relationship, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. She's selling it hard, and for casual fans who only catch highlights and listen to mainstream media, it probably sounds convincing. But here's what makes this so infuriating. That interview was damage control, pure and simple. Stephanie White wasn't coming on that show to share genuine feelings about her star player. She was coming on because the whispers were getting louder, the questions were piling up, and the front office was probably pushing her to get ahead of the narrative. Say the right things on the right platform, and maybe people stop asking questions. Maybe the story dies. Maybe everyone accepts that everything is fine in Indiana. The problem? The footage existed, and Coach Anderson on X dropped it right after. This isn't some grainy, hard-to-interpret cell phone video either. This is clear, unmistakable evidence of exactly what Caitlin Clark and everyone in that locker room already knew. The relationship between these two isn't what was being sold on the radio. Not even close. What we're looking at is a coach who went from telling the public she loves working with her star player to screaming in that player's face, throwing equipment, and telling her to get out of her sight. All caught on camera. All in front of thousands of people in the arena. All broadcast to whoever was paying attention. And this wasn't some isolated moment either. This is the culmination of weeks of tension finally boiling over. The worst part about this contradiction, the part that really gets under my skin, is what it tells us about the entire structure around Caitlin Clark. We've got a coach willing to go on national radio and paint a false picture of reality. We've got a front office that's clearly aware there's a problem, but is choosing to manage it through public relations instead of actually fixing what's broken. And we've got mainstream media outlets that are either too scared or too complicit to ask the hard questions that need to be asked. This isn't just about one heated exchange. This is about an organization that's willing to lie to the public while treating their most valuable asset like a problem that needs to be managed. That's the real story. And now that we've got the footage, that's the story nobody can spin anymore. But that's not even the worst part. When you actually break down what happened during that game, what the statistics show, and what Stephanie's decisions cost the Fever, you realize this goes deeper than just a personality clash. This is about strategy, about ego, and about a coach who's threatened by the cultural power her own player holds. Let's actually look at what happened on that sideline. This is where the body language tells the story that words can't hide. Stephanie White is standing there with this intensity in her face that's unmistakable. She's not just talking to Caitlin. She's pointing her finger, her jaw is tense, she's chewing on that gum with this aggressive energy that screams frustration, anger, and honestly, a loss of control. This isn't coaching. This is personal. And Caitlin's reaction? That's the moment everything becomes crystal clear. She throws her hands up in pure frustration. It's not a questioning gesture like, I don't understand the play. It's a gesture of absolute exasperation, like she's asking, what do you want from me? What more can I possibly give? She shakes her head. And if you read her lips, she's clearly saying something back, something that shows she is done with whatever this is. She's not some rookie who's going to sit there and take a public tongue lashing without a response. Now here's where Stephanie's psychology reveals itself in the most telling way. Right after she explodes, right after she's screaming at the face of her franchise, she looks around. She literally scans the arena. Why? Because she suddenly realizes there are thousands of cameras in that building. She knows that what she just did might be caught, and so she immediately shifts. She goes back to aggressively chewing her gum, tries to look composed, tries to seem like everything is fine. But the damage is already done. The moment was captured, and everyone watching knows exactly what they just saw. But let's go deeper into what actually triggered this moment. Look at the game situation right before this exchange. The Fever had some momentum. The game was still being decided. Then Stephanie makes a decision that would alter the entire course of the game. She pulls Caitlin out in the first quarter, during a stretch where the team actually had something going. And what happens the moment Caitlin hits the bench? Portland goes on a devastating 13-2 run. 13-2. That's not a coincidence. That's not just good defense by Portland. That's the entire rhythm of the game shifting because the primary engine of the offense has been removed. The Fever never recover from that decision. Never. They're playing catch-up the rest of the game, and they eventually lose in a way that shows the damage that single substitution caused. And then, in the middle of all this, Stephanie White has the audacity to scream at Caitlin like Caitlin is the problem. Like somehow Caitlin's defense is the reason the team is struggling. Like somehow Caitlin is responsible for systemic issues that are clearly coming from coaching decisions. Let's talk about that clipboard moment because it's not subtle. Stephanie doesn't just tap the clipboard, she throws it against the bench. You can see the aggression in the movement, the way her arm comes up with force, the way the clipboard hits the bench with this sharp impact. This is not measured coaching. This is someone who's lost emotional control in a public setting. And then she tells Caitlin to get the hell out of her face and calls for Raven Johnson to check in. Notice that substitution. Raven Johnson, the same player who has historical beef with Caitlin dating back to college. The same player who Caitlin humiliated on national television during the 2023 Final Four. That wasn't a random basketball substitution. That was Stephanie White sending a message. A message that says, you will bow down to my authority or I will replace you with the exact girl who has beef with you. The footage doesn't lie. It shows a coach who's completely lost emotional control. It shows a star player who's reached a breaking point. And it shows a dynamic that is fundamentally broken. This isn't about one game. This isn't about one moment. This is what's happening night after night, game after game, in that locker room. And now we have the proof. The timing of this is what really makes you understand the deeper game being played here. Stephanie White goes on the Query and Company radio show, and she's laying it on thick. She's talking about how much she respects Caitlin as a player and a person. She's claiming they're identical in their competitive fire, their competitive spirit, their perfectionism. She literally says, I love going to work with her every day. She says it with a smile in her voice. She says it like she believes it. She's selling a narrative to the public about a coach and player who are completely on the same page. And then, 48 hours later, the footage drops. And it's the exact opposite. It's not just a different story. It's the complete contradiction of everything she just said. This isn't a situation where someone's words were misinterpreted or taken out of context. This is a coach telling the media one thing and then doing something completely different when the cameras catch a real moment of emotion. According to reports from Afton Sports, that podcast interview was clearly a damage control situation. The whispers had been getting louder. The questions from fans and analysts were piling up. The front office was probably getting nervous about the narrative forming around this franchise. So Stephanie White gets called in to do an interview and tell people that everything is great, that she and Caitlyn are on the same page, that this is a harmonious working relationship. She's literally tasked with managing the narrative, with putting out a fire that was spreading online. But here's what's infuriating about this whole thing. If you're a coach who genuinely loves working with your star player, if you genuinely have nothing but respect and admiration for her, you don't need to go on a radio show to say it. You just go about your business. You coach her. You develop her. You let your actions speak for themselves. The fact that Stephanie felt compelled to go on air and make these declarations tells us everything we need to know. She was defending something. She was protecting a narrative that she knew was fragile. And the mainstream media, ESPN, these big platforms that are supposed to hold power accountable, they're not touching this. Why? Because there's a bigger game being played. The WNBA is in the middle of unprecedented growth. Caitlin Clark is the reason. She's the engine that's driving viewership, filling arenas, creating media value that didn't exist in women's basketball before she arrived. So when a story emerges that makes the league look bad, that makes coaching look problematic, that makes the Fever franchise look dysfunctional, there's pressure to manage it. The local beat writers in Indianapolis, they're in a precarious position. They need access. They need credentials. They need to be invited into the locker room, the offices, the post-game press conferences. If they start asking tough questions about why the coach is screaming at the star player, if they start pushing back on the official narratives, they risk losing that access. So instead, they ask safe questions about defensive rotations and third-quarter execution. They dance around the elephant in the room. They become part of the machine that's protecting the lie. But that's exactly why this footage matters so much. That's why it's spreading online right now, because it's impossible to spin. You can't look at the video and see anything other than what it is. You can't come up with a plausible explanation for why a coach is pointing her finger at her star player, throwing equipment, and telling her to get out of her face. You can't say that's just intense coaching. You can't say that's just a coach being demanding. That's a coach who's lost control and a player who's reached a breaking point. The gap between what Stephanie White said on that radio show and what the footage shows is so wide that it exposes the entire system. It shows that coaches will lie to protect themselves. It shows that media will soften the truth to maintain relationships. It shows that the league will try to manage narratives instead of addressing problems. And it shows that fans, the ones actually paying for tickets and merchandise, the ones keeping this league alive, are being fed a false story. Let's talk about what actually happened on the floor before this blowout occurred, because this is where the real incompetence reveals itself. According to the official WNBA box score from that game, Caitlin Clark was left on an island against elite guard play. Not just once, but in 2 consecutive games. She's being asked to defend top-tier talent without proper help from the rest of the roster, without adjustments to the scheme that would make her job more manageable. And when mistakes happen, when defensive assignments get broken down because of system failures, who does Stephanie White blame? Caitlin. Now compare this to how other elite franchises treat their cornerstone players. When the New York Liberty are struggling and Sabrina Ionescu gets caught in a defensive mismatch, does Sandy Brindello stand on the sidelines screaming in her face? When the Dallas Wings run their offense and Paige Buchers makes a defensive mistake, does her coaching staff publicly humiliate her? When the Las Vegas Aces hit a rough patch and Aja Wilson doesn't execute perfectly on a pick and roll coverage, does Becky Hammon throw her clipboard and bench her? Absolutely not. These coaches understand that you develop stars through instruction, through adjustment, through empowerment. You don't break them down through public humiliation. But Stephanie White operates in a different framework. She's screaming at Caitlin about defense like she's the primary problem on a team that has given up over 100 points in multiple games this season. That's not a Caitlin Clark problem. That's a systemic defensive problem. That's an entire team struggling to execute a scheme that might not be suited to the personnel available. And when you actually watch the film, when you look at what's happening on the court, Caitlin is basically telling her coach exactly that. She's saying, "I'm playing the coverage we drew up. I'm going straight up. What else do you want me to do?" And instead of adjusting the scheme, instead of providing actual coaching instruction that would solve the real problem, Stephanie White tells her to get out of her face. That's not coaching. That's abdication of responsibility. That's a coach who doesn't want to do the hard work of tactical adjustment, so she just blames her best player and moves on. Look at the actual statistics from that game. Caitlin plays 22 minutes and finishes with 6 points. 6. She's averaging nearly 24 points a game this season, third in the entire league in scoring, leading the WNBA in assists. And in this game, she scores 6 points because her coach completely broke her rhythm, destroyed her confidence, and benched her during the critical stretches where the game was still being decided. Meanwhile, Raven Johnson checks in off the bench, gets 10 minutes, and scores 3 points. So you're telling me that Raven Johnson was more effective than Caitlin Clark in that game? That's not what the stats show. That's not what the eye test shows. What actually happened is that Stephanie White made a substitution that was about control and authority, not about winning basketball games. She was sending a message to the locker room that nobody is untouchable, not even the generational superstar who's carrying this franchise. The Portland Fire went on a 13-2 run when Caitlin hit the bench in the first quarter. 13-2. That's not a coincidence. That's the evidence that Caitlin being on the floor matters more to winning than Caitlin being on the bench. The Fever never recovered from that decision. They were playing catch-up the entire game because of one substitution made in anger, made to prove a point, made to assert dominance over a player. If Stephanie White had actually adjusted the defensive scheme instead of just benching Caitlin, if she had provided actual tactical coaching instruction, if she had empowered her star player instead of trying to humble her, the outcome of that game could have been completely different. This isn't speculation. This is looking at the tape and understanding what actually happened on the floor. A coaching decision lost that game. A lack of tactical adjustments lost that game. And then the coach blamed the player for the coach's own failure. That's the disaster. That's what we're looking at. Now let's talk about something that's way darker than just a coaching blowout. Let's talk about why the Indiana Fever drafted Raven Johnson in the first place and what she represents in this locker room dynamic. Because if you're paying attention, this wasn't just a random basketball decision. This was intentional. This was calculated. And it reveals something deeply troubling about how this franchise is being run. In the 2024 draft, the Indiana Fever selected Raven Johnson with the 10th overall pick out of South Carolina. The fan base reacted immediately and not positively. Why? Because everyone remembers the history between Caitlin Clark and Raven Johnson dating back to their college days. Everyone remembers the 2023 Final Four, where Caitlin literally waved Raven off, treating her like a non-threat from beyond the arc. That moment was humiliating. It was on the biggest stage in amateur sports. It was the kind of disrespect that doesn't just go away. Raven herself admitted on podcasts that the online bullying and the embarrassment from that moment almost made her quit basketball entirely. She said it publicly. She talked about the psychological toll of being disrespected on that level. But she got her revenge. In the 2024 national championship game against Iowa, she had her moment against Caitlin and her team. So there's beef, real beef, historical beef that everyone in the basketball world knows about. So what does the Indiana Fever front office do? They draft Raven Johnson. They put her in the exact same backcourt with Caitlin Clark. They create a situation where two players with this history are forced to share a locker room, share the court, share a franchise. And then they hire Stephanie White, a coach who clearly has a massive ego and a need to prove that her authority supersedes any player's individual talent. When Aaliyah Boston spoke on her own podcast recently, she tried to play the peacemaker. She said that the fans have more beef than the players actually do, that everything was going to be completely fine once they got into training camp. But you can't tell me there isn't an underlying unspoken tension in that locker room when the head coach explicitly uses Raven Johnson as a weapon to humble Caitlin Clark on the sideline. That's not accidental. That's intentional. That's psychological warfare. When Stephanie White screams at Caitlin, throws her clipboard, and says she's putting Raven in, she's not just making a tactical substitution. She's sending a message. She's telling Caitlin, "You are not untouchable. I will replace you with the exact girl who has historical beef with you the second you don't bow down to my authority." Do you understand how damaging that is psychologically? Do you understand what that does to a player's confidence, to a player's mental state? This is a franchise that's actively working against its own star player, and not just through poor coaching decisions, but through deliberately constructed roster situations designed to create maximum psychological stress. Think about what Caitlyn is dealing with day in and day out. She's playing alongside someone who she embarrassed on national television. She's being coached by someone who tells the media she respects her while screaming in her face during games. She's on a team that went from making the playoffs under Christy Sides to being completely dysfunctional under Stephanie White. She's being benched in critical moments, humiliated publicly, and then expected to perform at her highest level. The worst part is that this was probably deliberate. The front office probably knew exactly what they were doing when they constructed this situation. They wanted to see if Caitlyn could handle adversity. They wanted to inject Raven Johnson into the situation to keep Caitlyn humble. They wanted Stephanie White to establish authority. And what they've created is a locker room that's actively sabotaging their best player instead of maximizing her potential. Compare this to what Caitlyn had at Iowa. She had Lisa Bluter, a coach who understood how to empower her greatness, who built a system that allowed Caitlyn to unlock her full potential as a generational playmaker. There wasn't psychological warfare. There was coaching that brought out the best in her, and the results speak for themselves. She broke the all-time scoring record. She transformed women's college basketball. Now look at what she has in Indiana, a coach who's threatened by her cultural relevance, a roster constructed to create internal friction, a franchise that's more focused on managing narratives than actually supporting its star player. That's not an organization trying to win. That's an organization trying to prove something to itself. This is where things get truly insidious. We're not just looking at an isolated coaching blowout on a random Tuesday night. No, we're looking at a systematic attempt by the Indiana Fever management and the higher-ups at the WNBA league offices to completely suppress any narrative that doesn't fit their picture-perfect corporate blueprint. This is institutional suppression of the truth, and it's happening in real time. Let's understand why Stephanie White was hired in the first place. According to an inside piece by The Athletic, the Fever ownership group felt that Christy Sides, despite making the playoffs and actually showing promise as a coach, lacked the media polish and the elite championship pedigree required to manage the absolute circus that surrounds Caitlyn Clark. They wanted a legendary figure, a homegrown Indiana hero who could step up to the podium, charm the journalists, and look completely in control. Stephanie White had won a championship in Indiana a decade ago. She had the resume, she had the gravitas, she looked the part. But when you peel back that glossy corporate veneer, what do you actually find? You find an old-school coach who is clearly threatened by the unprecedented leverage and power that a 24-year-old superstar holds over the entire sport. In the classic basketball hierarchy, the head coach is supposed to be the undisputed general. What they say goes, no questions asked. Everyone defers to the coach's authority. That's how it's always worked. But Caitlyn Clark isn't just another player on the roster. She's an economic engine. She's the reason charter flights are mandatory across the league now. She's the reason stadiums are moving to NFL arenas just to accommodate ticket demands. When a coach like Stephanie White steps onto the floor and realizes that 95% of the people in the stands bought a jersey with Caitlyn's name on it, not the coach's name, a dangerous psychological dynamic takes root. The coach's ego can't handle that. The coach's sense of authority is being challenged not by another coach or another player, but by the pure economic reality of how important this one player is to the franchise. Now look at how the local beat writers are covering this disaster. If you look at the post-game press conferences reported by the Indianapolis Star and the local news outlets, they barely even asked Stephanie White about the sideline blowout. They completely danced around the issue, asked safe, generic questions about defensive rotations and third-quarter execution. They avoided the elephant in the room like it didn't exist. Why? Because they're terrified. Terrified of losing their media credentials. Terrified of breaking the unwritten rule that you must never show the cracks in the WNBA structure. The Ringer published a massive piece just last week that literally claimed Caitlyn Clark fans were creating toxic narratives. They said fans were throwing wild theories against the wall, blaming everyone from Kelsey Mitchell to Christy Sides and now targeting Stephanie White. They framed legitimate concerns about coaching dynamics as conspiracy theories. But how can you call it a theory when we have literal video evidence? How can you call it speculation when the footage shows the coach screaming in her face, throwing equipment, and telling her to get out of her sight? The league itself is complicit in this. The WNBA is enjoying unprecedented viewership, sold-out arenas, and massive television deals. 90% of that momentum is driven by Caitlin Clark. She's the cultural phenomenon that elevated the entire league. But the people tasked with managing her day-to-day career are treating her like an obstacle rather than an asset. And when that reality becomes visible through leaked footage, the system swings into action to protect itself. Copyright strikes are being prepared right now. That's how fast they move. They get explosive videos off the internet quicker than a fast break, as they say, not because the footage is misleading or inaccurate, but because it contradicts the narrative the league and the franchise want to push. It shows dysfunction. It shows a coach losing control. It shows a star player being mistreated. None of that fits the corporate messaging. But that's why content creators like those at Street Hoops are so important. That's why independent voices matter. Because the mainstream media won't ask the questions, the beat writers won't push back, the league offices won't acknowledge the problem. So the truth gets buried under layers of PR statements and media management, until someone with a camera captures the real moment, until the footage becomes undeniable, until the public can see with their own eyes what's actually happening behind the closed doors of that organization. Look at Caitlin's eyes during these games. Really look at them. The joyous, free-flowing, long-range sniper that the entire basketball world fell in love with at Iowa is slowly being replaced by something different. You see a player who looks visibly exhausted, beaten down, mentally drained by her own coaching staff. That's not the natural progression of a player transitioning from college to the pros. That's the visible impact of being in a hostile work environment. At Iowa, if Caitlin missed a deep three or committed a turnover trying to force a spectacular pass, Coach Bluder would clap her hands and tell her to keep shooting. That's it. That's coaching elite talent. You don't shut down the creativity. You don't make the player afraid to take risks. You empower her to be great. And that empowerment is what allowed Caitlin to break the all-time scoring record. It's what allowed her to transform women's college basketball. It's what allowed her to become the most dominant player in the sport. But under Stephanie White's rigid defensive-first system, every single mistake is treated like a federal crime. If Caitlin misses a defensive assignment on an elite guard because the frontline help rotation is late, Stephanie treats her like a rookie who doesn't understand the game. If Caitlin takes a three-pointer that doesn't fall, it's not keep shooting. It's criticism. It's blame. It's a public display of disrespect that sends a message to the entire locker room that the coach doesn't trust her best player. This creates a psychological state where a player stops playing freely. A player starts second-guessing herself. A player becomes hesitant. A generational talent becomes ordinary because she's playing scared. She's playing to avoid criticism instead of playing to win. And that's exactly what's happening to Caitlin right now. You can see it in her shot selection. You can see it in the way she's moving on the floor. You can see it in her overall demeanor. The joy is gone. The combination of being forced to share a locker room with Raven Johnson, someone who she has historical beef with, while simultaneously being screamed at and benched by a coach who's threatened by her importance to the league, is creating a perfect storm of psychological stress. This isn't just about basketball anymore. This is about a player's mental health, her confidence, her sense of safety and support within her own organization. Caitlin came into this season as the most exciting player in women's basketball. The narrative was about how she would elevate the Fever, how her transition to the pros would be seamless, how she would lead Indiana to championships. But the organization has done everything in its power to undermine that narrative. They've created friction where there shouldn't be any. They've hired a coach whose ego is incompatible with supporting a star player. They've constructed a roster that creates internal tension. And they've allowed it all to happen in public. The statistics are already showing the impact. 6 points in a game where she averages 24. That's not a one-game anomaly. That's the result of systematic breakdown of a player's confidence. That's the result of a coach who's using her star player as a scapegoat for her own coaching failures. That's the result of a franchise that's prioritizing control over winning. And the worst part is that Caitlin sees it all clearly. She's not dumb. She's one of the most intelligent players in the league. She understands the dynamics at play. She knows that she's being treated unfairly. She knows that the scheme isn't designed to maximize her talents. She knows that her coach is threatened by her relevance, and she's reaching a breaking point. That's what we saw on the sideline. That wasn't just frustration. That was a breaking point. That was a superstar who's completely done with being disrespected in her own organization. If you're a true basketball fan, if you understand what we're witnessing right now, you need to speak up about this. You need to comment below. You need to share this video. You need to make sure this footage doesn't get buried under copyright strikes and corporate PR statements. Because what's happening to Caitlin Clark is bigger than just one player. It's about how the league treats its stars. It's about whether an organization can build a championship culture through control and humiliation, or whether they need to build it through empowerment and trust. The fans are already reacting. Look at the comment sections on any sports blog or social media platform right now. The sentiment is overwhelmingly anti-Stephanie White. People are traveling across the country, spending thousands of dollars on tickets and hotel rooms and merchandise just to watch Caitlin get benched in the first quarter and screamed at during timeouts. That's not a sustainable product. That's a franchise destroying itself from the inside out. Think about what Caitlin has sacrificed to get to this point. She's worked her entire life to become the player she is. She's broken records. She's transformed the sport. She single-handedly elevated the WNBA to levels of viewership and relevance it's never seen before. And now, in return for all of that, the organization that's supposed to support her is actively working against her. That's a betrayal. That's institutional negligence. That's franchise mismanagement at the highest level. Amber Cox, the general manager of the Indiana Fever, needs to wake up and realize what's happening. She needs to understand that she's burning down her own house just to feed a coach's ego. She brought Stephanie White in to be the savior, the veteran leader who understood how to manage high-level talent. But instead, Stephanie is acting like a tyrant who can't handle the spotlight. She can't handle the reality that a player has more cultural relevance than she does. And that insecurity is destroying the locker room. This franchise is at a critical crossroads. If the front office doesn't step in immediately and establish boundaries, if they don't sit down with Stephanie White and have a real conversation about what's acceptable and what's not, this season is completely lost. The Fever aren't going to make the playoffs. Not like this. Not with this dynamic. Not with a coach who's using her best player as a scapegoat for her own failures. The WNBA is at a cultural moment right now. The league is bigger than it's ever been. Viewership is up. Ticket sales are up. The product is thriving. But it's thriving because of Caitlin Clark. It's thriving because fans are invested in watching her play. And if the league allows franchises to mistreat her, if they allow coaches to publicly humiliate her, if they allow organizations to sabotage their own stars, then they're going to lose that momentum. Fans won't tolerate it. They'll turn away. They'll find other things to invest their time and money in. So Amber Cox, Stephanie White, and anyone else in that organization needs to understand something. You cannot market a player as the savior of women's basketball and then allow a coach to publicly humiliate her on a nightly basis. You cannot build a sustainable franchise on dysfunction and control. You cannot win championships through psychological warfare. That's not how elite sports organizations operate. We're going to be following this situation closely. Street Hoops will continue breaking down the footage, analyzing the dynamics, and asking the questions that mainstream media is too scared to ask. Because the fans deserve to know the truth. They deserve to see what's actually happening behind closed doors. They deserve better than sanitized post-game press conferences and PR stunts designed to hide dysfunction. Smash that like button. Comment your honest thoughts. Do you think Stephanie White needs to be fired immediately? Do you think Caitlin Clark needs to demand a trade out of Indiana to a franchise that actually respects her? Subscribe to Street Hoops because this story is just getting started. Stay locked in. The real conversation is about to begin. We've just broken down one of the most troubling dynamics in women's basketball right now. A coach who lied to the media. A franchise that's actively sabotaging its own star. A locker room that's become a hostile environment. And most importantly, a superstar player who's reached a breaking point with disrespect and mismanagement. The footage doesn't lie. The statistics don't lie. The body language doesn't lie. What we're witnessing is an organization that's completely lost sight of what matters, and it's costing them everything. Caitlin Clark is carrying this franchise on her shoulders, and instead of supporting her, they're pushing her down. This is the real story. This is what mainstream media won't tell you. This is why Street Hoops exists. Because someone has to tell the truth. And that truth is that the Indiana Fever are destroying themselves from the inside out, and Caitlin Clark is paying the price.